So, question to you, Chad, and welcome everyone. Alex is here. Travel, is it Travel or Travel? I don't know. Can't remember actually. It's been a while since I've been in space with you, so I don't remember how to pronounce your name. So apologies there. Uh, and then Andrea Vortex is here, and then Cameron's joining us as well. Uh, Chad, if you were to name these spaces, I know I've been putting hashtag tech is hiring because that's the easiest way to have a hashtag because they already exist. But I don't know if we call these like the saucy chats, um, sauce reports. There's probably a name we have for this in the future, but I have no idea what it's going to be.
Making the sauce, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, secret sauce is taken already.
Yeah. So I mean, like, because it feels like the secret sauce is more like you already have the thing,
Yeah,
and you're just kind of putting it out into the world. Whereas like these Twitter spaces are less about like concrete answers and more about a discussion. So that's why I was like thinking like making the sauce or let me think of or pizza. I guess pizza hour works as well, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, we could call it. I did use the name Pizza Party for a while for my streams last summer. So pizza parties are great social events to gather folks to talk about technical hiring challenges and open source. So maybe we go with that, but we don't have to talk about the name moving forward. We'll talk about that offline. But I did want to welcome everybody. This is what we're now going to be called the Pizza Party until we have a better name. And Chad and I have been off and on every week, off and on. We've been chatting about this general topics around tech, hiring, talking about layoffs as of recent too as well. So that was interesting conversations. And today, I actually wanted to talk about mentorship and how to convince people to mentor you, because I think there is a bit of a science and like a bit of elegance that we can actually leverage when it comes to mentorship. So I'm curious, Chad, what is your experience with mentorship?
It's kind of, I've had an interesting experience. I've kind of reached out to several people. I guess so. One of the kind of difficulties of mentorship or trying to find mentorship is, people are a little bit intimidated to approach people, to ask them to kind of help, you know, and it's kind of weird, right? It's a weird conversation because effectively it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please help me however you can. Also, please help me by actually figuring out what I need to do and then tell me what to do, right? So, like, I'm a little bit more open in terms of reaching out to people, but um I would say I've had a bit of a mixed experience. And to be fair, it's for good reason. Like, I'm open to reaching out to people, but it was a combination of I was more on like, I don't know what to do, somebody please help me type deal, as opposed to kind of like a direct kind of, need. And one of the things is something I think we should talk about is kind of it needs to be like a mutual relationship. The mentor and mentee needs to be a mutual relationship. Both parties needs to be gaining from this. Granted, there may be some level of imbalance or something like that, but in when I first was starting and looking out for a mentor, it wasn't necessarily that mutual relationship. It was very kind of some level of transactional relationship, where like it's almost like I'm trying to it was transactional in a sense where one party benefited, more than likely the party of me benefited way more than the other party. But you kind of live and learn. And then you kind of you understand more like kind of how to approach things, like. But yeah, like I guess my journey through finding a mentor was one of learning like much of your journey in tech.
And speaking of journey, like I feel like mentorship, like getting a mentor and mentorship is in the same vein. Like it's not about what's that saying about it. mentorship is more about the friends you make along the way, as opposed like anyway. There's like a I forget what the quote comes from, so I basically butchered that. So apologies everyone who can answer that. But what I'm getting at is like mentorship could be something that you don't really actually know you're getting mentorship. Like it could be free help. It could be a regular conversation of someone that's willing to take your request on Calendly, or they give you their Calendly, and like that becomes like a situation where people just imparting knowledge into you, and you don't even realize it. And I think that's honestly I think it's kind of the best mentorship is like people who have experiences or a skill set that you're trying to get into, and it's just a bunch of conversations and you just come ready with questions. And honestly sometimes you don't even know like you're ready with questions. And I think I did see Anthony was actually on a space. Anthony does a lot of Anthony D. Mays. He does a lot of spaces around breaking into tech, and I would say he would be like a great mentor for a lot of people. And you probably don't even know that because I remember being in a space with Anthony, and someone came up who I've never seen before, has a very low Twitter following, but individual showed up in a lot of Anthony spaces, and I've seen him in other spaces, and he's just getting free mentorship by just showing up and asking questions in spaces, and like this making sure like when the floor is open, he's asking his question. He's like basically trying to get advice from whoever's being represented, like as far as experts on the panel or whatnot. So I guess what I'm getting at is like sometimes you just don't really realize you're getting mentorship. Like I would say like my first dev job in San Francisco, I worked at this startup. It was education platform to teach people how to learn code, and there's actually mentors on the platform as well. But my best mentorship was actually my manager. And at that point, as a developer, I didn't really get a lot of mentorship when it came to engineering. I got a lot of people who'd answer questions, and I always, up until that point, felt like I just had to get out of the way. So I'd ask my question and go back to work, or try not to linger too much, or ask any like dumb questions. But that manager, that's in particular job, would he gave me a lot of time. He gave me like an hour, like 45 minutes an hour of one-on-one time every other week, because he saw that I had like a skill set that was kind of developing. And I would just ask a lot of questions around like, I don't really know outside of Ruby on Rails. I didn't know much outside of that. So I was like, I want to learn more about the web. I want to know how the web works. So I'd ask him all those questions that I was too afraid to ask to my colleagues. And he would break it down. He'd give me a book. When I told him, hey, I want to start doing conference talks, like there's conferences I've attended, I think I can give a talk. I like talking. So he gave me like a whole list of resources of like how to give your first conference talk, like where to upload your slides, where to get slide ideas from. And he just like was truly a good mentor for me. And like I think that's a natural mentorship, like manager to report is it's a natural occurrence, but you don't actually it doesn't have to be as official. It could just be like I asked enough questions, and I respected the person's time enough to be like, hey, I know your skill set. How do I get to where you're at?
I completely agree. I completely agree. Like it's definitely about kind of that natural relationship. I also wanted to kind of point out that mentorship doesn't even necessarily have to be with somebody who you're actively talking to. Like there's a lot of what was it? There's a lot of examples of people getting kind of mentored by watching YouTube videos. Like especially if you're kind of think of mentorship as kind of imparting knowledge, right? Like if somebody who always makes good content, like who was it? I don't remember who was the I think he was from Sweden. He used to work at Spotify, but he spent like 3 years making like YouTube videos for like JavaScript and stuff like that. And he imparted a lot of great knowledge. You know what I mean? Like I spoke with Swix the other day, and he told me how to pronounce his name. Uh, I don't want to. I'm going to just mispronounce. No, I'm not going to do that. Person of from Pragmatic Engineer.
Oh, gurgly.
But like, Gerge, yeah, Gerge. No, that's. Anyways,
Gurgly. I
it's
say gurgly, but it
it's
doesn't sound
not
like it rolls off
that.
the tongue.
It's not that because I
Okay.
pronounced it like so. I remember pronouncing it like how I thought it was, and Swix was just like, "Nope, that's not his name." I was like, "Sorry." Um, anyways, you're not anyways, but like is an absolute great mentor to, like, especially a lot of people who kind of don't understand the meta of tech. Everybody's kind of, heads down into writing code, making products and stuff like that, but they may not necessarily understand how the industry works, how people interact with one another. You know what I mean? But he is talking a lot about, like, finance. He's been doing a lot of reporting, in the economic downturn. He's doing a lot of reporting on how businesses have been kind of how companies have been treating their employees, when there's layoffs, employee reactions and stuff like that. And you can just gain a lot of information from following those people. They don't have to know your name at all, but they're effectively mentoring you by producing their content, as long as you're willing to consume and digest it. You know what I mean? So, like, it doesn't have to be this formal thing where you're like writing up some contract is like, you be my mentor for 6 months type deal. It's definitely not one of those. Like you said earlier, it is probably better if there is some kind of level of friendship or just camaraderie, like between you and the person. It doesn't have to be an official thing at all. you know
Yeah, I would say that level of friendship too as well. I think a lot of times I've definitely been turned off with folks that approach me and say, "Hey, I would like you to officially be my mentor." Like, I don't think I can commit to that, to be quite honest. Like, I can't commit to a steady cadence of meetings and expectation setting and like for ground rules for me. If I'm going to mentor you, like, I don't need an official statement. I don't need to sign the dotted line. I don't need your money. But I think a lot of times mentorship is just like folks is showing up. So if a mentee wants mentorship out of me, to show up in the places I show up. So if it is following me on Twitter, that's helpful because at least you're on the same page. If I bring up a situation or a story and you've been following me on Twitter and then I'm like, oh yeah, like on my podcast I said this, like I don't need you to like subscribe and listen to every single one of my podcasts, but like I'd expect you to be like, I already answered this question in another place, go listen to it. Or I already did a space with Chad. Go listen to that conversation up on YouTube. Which, shout out, we do actually have these recorded up on YouTube. So youtube.com/open sauce. Scroll to the bottom and you'll see Chad in my face. And yeah, always be plugging. But what I'm getting at is like, the one thing so I learned how to code back in 2013 officially. Like I learned how to code. I wanted to build an app. I got a mentor actually, and they got me unblocked on how to build this app. And it was like a 12-week process of us connected and meeting regularly. And then at that point, I was like, oh, cool, I learned how to code. Thanks so much. Like, we'll stay in touch. We did for like probably like 6 months to a year and sort of grew away. But what I'm getting at is that, actually, what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is that like I had a clear goal of like how to succeed and get into tech. It took actually 17 weeks in total for me when I decided to learn how to code to when I actually got my first job. It was a different time. Like, you could spell PHP and get a job at that point. And that was just the kind of situation early 2010s. So with that, and this is like just as boot camps were starting. So now it's a whole more structured path. It's a lot harder. You can do front end, but you got to do a little bit more than front end to get a job. So what I'm getting at is like once I got my job, I wrote a blog post. Was like, this is what I did to get my job, and it's still out there. I've got it's original blog. I won't share the URL. If you look hard enough, you'll find it. And then I got a bunch of people reaching out to me saying, "Oh, you got a job? Like, how can I learn from you? Can we jump on a call, hang out? Like, let me learn more about this." So I ended up getting to the point where I was just constantly my presence on the internet was basically, I got a job. Let me show you how to get a job as well. And I had to make a conscious decision of like, I have to also get mentorship myself. I can't always be giving. So I started writing blog posts. I started doing a podcast. So that way I get to say, okay, I already answered this question. Actually, under my GitHub, bdougie/AMA, I had to have frequently asked questions. And I did that because I saw Kent C. Dodds do this as well. So all the questions that people ask me about getting a job, what tech stack, like what to do, it's all out of date. It's a couple years old. But what I'm getting at is like, I just put all those answers in one place, so I didn't have to keep answering those same questions over and over again. And I would get, I don't want to say smarter questions because there's no such thing as a dumb question, but I would get smarter questions because all the easier questions I answered. I put out there if you ask me an easy question, I'd give you the easy link to go find like the rest of the information yourself. So then I consciously, as I was leveling myself up, I started looking for folks who I can level up into what I was trying to do. So like I was learning React back in 2014. So like 2014, 2015. So like a year or two after learning how to code officially, React had come out, and I learned that. And I found people to get mentored, me as a mentee, mentored into like learning React. And then I turned around and would teach other folks how to do React. And that was like my career for years. So I moved away from just like how to get a job in tech to like how to be a better dev. And sometimes it could be when it comes to mentors. And then, so going back to our original question, like how do you convince mentors to mentor you? You got to recognize like sometimes a mentor doesn't really want to answer the same questions over and over again, because that's just a sign for burnout. So like if they have a book, if they have a newsletter, if they have a Twitter account, or like years of conference speaking or whatever it is, like probably go watch that first, and then ask the harder questions.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. Like it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, it can't be, or it's very hard for it to be like a transactional relationship. You know what I mean? Like, mentors have their own other lives to live. Like advice that I get, that I hear a lot is that you kind of have to the best way to start a mentorship is not necessarily to start with I want, could you like ask, to ask a question, or to get to ask something to be given to you. Is more to approach with a potential solution to a problem that the person has, or at the very least be willing to help with that particular thing, like going. So the thing is, you just can't necessarily just constantly approach people and say I want. You know what I mean? It's actually really easy to kind of approach people with I want, could you please mentor me type deal. And after a while, especially if you're a level of what you call it, if you're a certain level of person, like you're somewhat known, like you will get a fair amount of these. Even if you don't get them often, you will get them enough where you just don't necessarily want to hear them anymore. So like you were saying, like if you get somebody asking the easy questions, you've consciously given yourself the ability to kind of give them the easy link to answer them, so that you at the very least can still give value to them. But there's a lot of people who will just be like, I just don't have the bandwidth, or I don't want to try to make the bandwidth for you, and they'll just call it from there. You may not even get a reply, and some people are just more like hi, and like people are now like making conscious efforts to like, I'm not replying to hi, so it's definitely about like that kind of camaraderie. And you mentioned this before, like as a way at the very least to get in contact with you, is to kind of just be seen, often, so that people recognize you. Like you'd be surprised, funny enough, open source is actually a really good way of kind of describing the same kind of idea. If you're looking for mentorship from somebody, and you know that they have an open source project, and you try to contribute, and obviously you're not trying to contribute like a jerk, where all your like you're doing, you may not necessarily be doing strong contributions, like for instance, there's like rules to contribution and you're ignoring them and stuff like that. But if you're like showing up there often, they'll be like, oh, I recognize Chad, does really solid contributions. It doesn't even necessarily matter what types of contributions they are. It's like, oh, they're really good contributions. They're helpful. I've merged a fair amount of their PRs, and now they know you. You know what I mean? And now they're more willing to talk to you. So even just kind of being there, being in the present, being there, and just talking to them casually, like you stream, people coming to your stream and saying, hey, what's up? And, offering you help as you're coding because you code on your stream, like just being a familiar name, is a lot of times, good enough to just even get into that conversation.
Yeah, I honestly I think that's 100% true. And the one thing I've actually been doing because I'm basically I'm founder of a company which is open source, and what I'm finding pretty quickly it's and I've said this before in previous spaces, which is it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. So it is about who enters you as well. So like if I'm saying, hey, I want to get funding, or hey, I want some help answering these questions around finance, in order to get like an actual accountant or someone or a legal person, a lawyer to trust me, it's the intro that actually matters the most. So it's even like if you're looking at your network and you're like, I don't know who's going to mentor me. I'm just cold emailing and DMing folks. Will you be my mentor? Or, hey, can I get it on your calendar to have a chat? It's going to be way more challenging. Like I have a bunch of DMs that I haven't responded to, and they're good DMs. It's like I'm founding a company in the Jamstack, and I want to get exposure this way, or I want to get your feedback on this product, or I think you because you have a podcast, and these are actual DMs. Like you have a podcast, can you try my product? And I'm like I can't respond to that because like there's like three of those in my DMs right now. Of like I tried this new podcast product, and the truth is I don't really care too much about podcast products because my goal is not to be a podcaster. Like I'm trying to build a cool and technical tool. Podcasting is just like the means to the end for that to help support that. So I guess what I'm getting at is like there is I guess different ways to go about it. But if somebody said, or if Chad was like, hey, my friend is building a product in podcasting, can you take a look and give them feedback? I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll help out Chad. I trust Chad. Chad does really good work with me. Yeah, let me help out a friend of a friend of a friend, and I'll do it. So I think what it really comes down to, like you gotta, if you want to be a friend, you gotta. Sorry, if you want a friend, you gotta be a friend. Which I guess there's like these B Dougieisms that I always bring up because these are like I'm in the upper scale of the dad territory. So now my wisdom is now cured enough that I just say the same things over and over again.
Yeah. Upper scale of the dad territory, that is an interesting way of putting it. But like I completely agree. That's actually something that I kind of wanted to talk about as well, is just the power of people advocating for you. And I think that's also something that we actually don't talk a lot about in the mentorship conversation. It always feels like the mentorship conversation is tend to be about the exchange of information. You have information that I don't have. I may not even know that it's important, but if I talk to you long enough, I'll get that information. And again, it feels very transactional, right? But and this is something that I'm learning as well, like funny enough, I hear this saying from you a lot. Well, not that I hear the saying from you or not, but tech is not equitable, and so you need to come to get your as much advantage as you possibly can. You know what I mean? And one of those advantages could be having somebody in your corner in the right room at the right time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did a YouTube video on how I got my job at GitHub, and when I shared the story as like I met somebody who I invited on my podcast, and then that same somebody went from senior engineer to eventually engineering manager to eventually director at GitHub. So like I made that one connection in 1 year. They got promoted twice, and after that year, they're like, "Hey, I'm growing my team. Come interview at GitHub." So I was like, "Yeah, sure, of course. Like GitHub's a great company. Let me interview." What the takeaway from one of the persons that listened to that video was like, "Oh, well, it turns out the only way to get a job at GitHub is to know somebody that works at GitHub and get like introduced into the interview." And I was like, "Ah, well, that's an interesting takeaway. Like that's honestly not what I was getting at. What I was getting at is like, yes, you do. It does pay to know people, but if the what is it? The dance is only as good as while the music is playing. Like, if you know there's a game to be played or a dance, then learn the moves. And I think what I'm trying to do is teach all the moves to everybody who looks like me to basically give them the leg up. And the individual who responded is like a former colleague of mine, white male. So like nothing against white men, but like I think they have way more knowledge about how the dance is being played, or how the game is being played. And I feel like his takeaway was just null and void. Like I get where he's coming from, and that's not what I was trying to get at. What I was trying to get at is like, hey, black folks, I've got a secret sauce. I'm going to share it with you. Here's the video, and like, obviously, reach out to me if you have any more questions. And that same person is continuing to be my champion inside of GitHub until today. Like, it's not even ended. Like, he still is championing the project I'm working on, even as I'm sort of working outside of GitHub on this thing. But it's valuable. It's valuable when the people that I learned how to code with alongside in the boot camp are now startup founders and they're now senior engineers and managers. So like if I have a network of like actual engineers that learned how to code 10 years ago through a boot camp who are now hiring people. So I'm not going to display that and share that all day, every day. But if someone reaches out to me and says, hey, I'm trying to get into tech, this is my skill set, well, I'll give you actual like tangible advice. And most of my advice currently in the current market is like, probably learn something more than just React, because I get a lot of people who reach out to me like, oh, I just want to do a React job. Of course you want to do a React job. That's a fun thing to work in, but it's not the needs of like every single person, every single company.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. No, like that's definitely a good story in terms of kind of like your what you call it, how you kind of came up. Like I personally haven't, oh no, not until recently, I personally haven't had that opportunity, and it's just like it's really interesting. I mean, to be fair, like it's like this down here in Jamaica, but it's just really interesting, how like how important your network is. Everybody kind of thinks of, oh, it's your skill, it's the value that you bring, and those things are important, but like just who is really important. And it's not even this, yeah, it's just really interesting how much more important that is, and people always give the advice, oh, you need to know React, like you're saying, or you need to know more than React. You need to add value, but it also, like the networking aspect is still really important as well.
Yeah, and I would say that there's another story from GitHub where GitHub has a lot of open source projects. A lot of companies have open source projects, and this one individual, what they did is they took some time, like they were in their last year of college. They intern at GitHub, so obviously privileged position to be in to intern in GitHub. So take that with a grain of salt. But after like in the middle of their internship, they basically asked a ton of questions to engineers, and eventually got themselves into contributing back to Electron. Because at the time, GitHub, they maintain Electron. Electron being the sort of underlayer, the shell of Atom. Atom being the previous, now defunct IDE. Now VS Code taking its market share. But what I'm getting at is like they contributed to Electron. They contributed to other projects at GitHub, to the point where then GitHub's like, you're doing enough contribution. Like, why don't you stick around as like an open source contributor, but we'll contract you to like just keep an eye on this stuff. So the whole last year of college, they just contributed to open source, stayed close, had conversations for 9 months, which is like the 2 semesters that 2.5 semesters between going back to school and the next summer. And at the end of that, GitHub was basically like, well, that manager was like, you've done so much work for this company, why don't you just like come work here? Now, I'll ask you this question, Chad, but do you think this person whiteboarded?
So with the tone of the way you asked that question, I'm just gonna say no.
Yeah, no, they didn't whiteboard. They didn't have a technical screen because they spent 9 months contributing to this open source project. And that's exactly how back in 2016, 2017, when Facebook was hiring, now Meta, was hiring React devs in the core team, they were just going through all the open source projects that were just like making the React ecosystem and saying, hey, job here, like sign here, and you have to move to either Menlo Park or London or New York, I think. New York now, but basically, all those folks who took those jobs, they were all dudes, and majority dudes, to be quite frank. They all got jobs at Facebook at the time because of their skill set that you could just showcase directly in their contribution. So like they were getting free mentorship from open source, getting free feedback, and I'd say free time is it's a cost, but there's a lot of folks who do have a lot of free time and want to see their projects grow, and yeah, people were just excited to get support, contribution, collaboration, community, all through the back of open source. And every time someone in open source gets their PR reviewed, that's mentorship. Like if someone opens up a PR in open source and their PR is just completely all over the place, like they just completely ignored the linter or they didn't read any of the contributing guide, I can now mentor them, or not even just me, anybody in open source can mentor them and say, hey, your code's not up to par, fix this, this, and this. By the way, we're using TypeScript. Here's how to import interfaces. Like now you're learning TypeScript for free. Like you're not paying for this training. We're now coaching on how TypeScript works in any open source project. And now we're getting, like we just tweeted just recently, this individual who just shipped 3 PRs in the last 2 days. And they're like they're not trivial stuff. Like this person actually knows their stuff. They're based out in Lagos, and we shouted them out because they are doing some legit work. And if you are hiring right now, like this is a person I would definitely be reaching out to, because not only they've proven their skill, but they've taken feedback on their code. And I think one of the hardest things about coming out of a boot camp or coming out of college is you don't have real life work experience unless you've interned. And internships it's a privileged position to be in. So if you can now showcase, hey, I can actually work on code with a product that today has 500 weekly active users. Like now I'm working on production grade code that's being supported by a bunch of people around the world. That's something I would put on my cover letter.
No, definitely, definitely, definitely. Like it's kind of I don't know. I kind of wish I'd known this really really early on, to be quite honest with you, because it's like I was definitely in the same position as well. But like it's just really interesting how where you can get like all this kind of knowledge from different sources. You're always trying to kind of like you're trying to go down the traditional path because that's what you hear, right? Like even with this conversation, oh, you need to find a mentor, reach out to people and pretty much hope somebody says, yeah, sure, I'll mentor you. When it's like you could easily just like you said, contribute to open source project, and contribute to a project like open source, and like it's just you set up a PR, and like if your PR is needs work, then that information you definitely kind of take away. Like I work with you. We work on a project that we can't really talk about right now, but we work on a project, and I've definitely had times where I've submitted a PR for the project, and like I've gotten kind of, in fact, one of the things like we were having an issue with CSS, and one of the feedback was just like there's CSS issues everywhere, and it was because a lot of the how I kind of built layouts were from way back in the day. Like we have a lot more tools now, and one of the people, Eric, shout out to Eric, by the way, one of Eric, I was able to kind of sit down and speak to him, and like he gave me some advice, and then I realized Eric knows a lot more about CSS than I do, and it's like I just could just reach out to him, and like, to be honest, just that one conversation just made my CSS abilities just so much better, right? And it's like you get that all the time, like with open source, like just being able to contribute to projects. And it's like it's very very likely that people will just kind of offer you advice, to make the PR better, that you just simply didn't know before submitting.
Yeah. I just bumped up Travell. Did you want to unmute and let us know if we got your name correct, and then Let us know what you want to add to the conversation.
I love it. And it's Travell, and I love when people call me Travel. Especially like I tell people my name is Travel. It's spelled Travel with an additional L over the phone. And I crack up every time when they are like, how do I spell that? So I was silently having like a whole moment to myself over here rolling. And I just want to say, like, I appreciate the space. I appreciate like this conversation because I talk about it all the time. And one of the things, V Dougie, going back to your point about like moving into big companies and using mentorship to do so, I actually started in tech support and moved over to engineering. And one of the most interesting things was I realized that the entire hiring process was a construct, that there would eventually sort of like be people making subjective, like we all want to think that the algorithmic whiteboarding portion of an interview is subjective, but I mean objective, but it is deeply subjective in every way. Someone's going to walk away with their opinion of how you paired and how you came to the solution or whatever. And what ended up happening with me is I was able to get mentorship from across my organization. So when it came time for me to transition into being a software engineer, all four panels were made up of people who had mentored me or seen my code or had experienced me in some form or fashion. And the end result was I think that there was a bias that they included when interpreting things because I do know that there are probably ways I could have done things better. But I do want to say that like mentorship in this way, if people do get to see your prior work, do get to experience you, do get to have some kind of collaboration, or even if y'all are just chatting about bullshit, like I have a whole mentor who's non-technical and she runs her own recruiting agency and is always sending me jobs, and we call each other every Monday morning to just bullshit, to be like, girl, did you see this? This is crazy. And that has added so much value. So I love this conversation, but I do want to highlight that in the interview and hiring and the pursuing of jobs and all that stuff, because usually like that's what most people think about when they think about mentorship. Um, you can leverage it in that way, especially if you come from a underrepresented background. But thank y'all.
Yeah, appreciate you adding to the conversation, Chad. You had your hand up.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to. It's just kind of like a question that kind of I had, and I brought up. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Lloyd. I'm hoping I pronounced your name correctly. Uh, I wanted to say void, but I was just like, there's an L there. So, anyways, I kind of wanted to ask a quick question. Like, what do you think are like? I guess as mentors, I haven't necessarily. So my mentorship is tends to be very much around hiring because in my name it says tech is hiring guy. But like, what kind of topics? Like say you have like some kind of conversation, like an actual conversation, every, say, 30 minutes to an hour every day with like, let's go with a direct report or just somebody who, you have some relationship with and you've set up time to talk with them directly. Do you have like conversations? I guess I want to put this out to the speakers. Do you have like specific topics that you tend to want to hit, you want to make sure that they kind of understand, like they grow from, or is it more organic?
For me specifically, it's more organic just because of how I got my mentors. Like that's what I was gonna. That's why I raised my hand to come up and speak. It's just because of the way that I got my mentors. I just sent out a mass DM to like a whole bunch of black men in tech that looked like they were legit, that looked like they had something else going on besides strictly being a tech account. Um, and I just simply hit them up and say, hey, as a young black man, I'd like to get some mentorship by black men because I can understand how competitive it can be. Um, And simple as that. I didn't ask to like give them a call or anything. I just said, if you want to, I'm here to listen. And a lot of them responded well. Um, but I think the thing that got them to mentor me for real is the tips and tricks that they gave me. I actually was receptive and I actually gave them feedback on after I did it. Like, here's what happened. And I think to them, not only do I talk about other things like sports, I work out, and other things that I feel like people will be interested in. I'm very receptive, and I was interested in learning. So with my mentors, we talk about a lot. Sometimes we talk strictly about certs, how to maneuver through, because I work in the DoD, how to maneuver from the DoD space, how to interview, how to be assertive in interviews and ask the right questions. But in general, it's more generic, it's more organic, and usually they'll bring up things. Sometimes I'll ask as well, but I don't really push the issue as I'm like asking a teacher. Like I just ask it like I'm asking an uncle or like I'm asking somebody in the barbershop, hey, what do you think about this? So
Travell, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I agree completely. What I will say is though, as I've progressed and become more of a specialist, that it sort of changed for me. So, like, if I know that there's a particular problem I'm trying to solve, which is how things are kind of going for me these days, I look for mentors who are trying to solve that particular problem, and I create a relationship around that. For context, I'm one of those API geeks floating around Twitter. So I look for mentors who are trying to solve some of the same problems with APIs that I'm having, and I think that just creates like a natural relationship. Other times, what I have found when um, I've encountered like underrepresented or like Lloyd was saying, like other black males or black queer people or anything like that. Our conversations tend to start from like, oh, Beyonce just did this thing, or this other thing is happening with black people. And then it begins to shape around, okay, with us having this shared identity and this shared sense of community, what does that mean for our roles in tech and how can we collaborate? So, for my mentor who runs a recruiting agency, she doesn't have a technical background at all. So, our mentor mentee relationship is her giving me advice on navigating organizations from a political standpoint, and my return is providing knowledge on the technical aspects of recruiting. So how do you decipher whether somebody's a good candidate, or what should you look for in a role? Or I remember one time we sat down for 2 hours and I walked her through Rails and building a Rails app from the ground up and what's happening on the web and how do you know if an applicant sort of understands it and stuff like that. Whereas there's a CTO who's my mentor, and we just bullshit. Like we may talk about architectural stuff from time to time, if there's a particular problem that both of us are trying to solve, or either one of us are trying to solve. I'm sorry, but ultimately, I think that relationship we both are kind of we're maintaining because we see the shared value that each other can provide. And we do this sort of thing where it's like we're going to continue to explore each other's experiences and identities from not just a professional standpoint, but also a personal standpoint because we see the value in that. So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, appreciate that. And Chad, to answer your question from my point of view, what I always come like ready with a couple questions, like what I actually want to get out of the meeting. I always try to like send an agenda up front, depending on like how high caliber. So I met with a couple of VCs early this year to kind of try to find out if what I'm working on is investable and all this other stuff. And like this wanted this like feedback. I didn't really need their money. I needed feedback. So I sent questions up front. I sent a slide deck up front. I sent like enough that would be digestible quickly up front, so that way they had context of like why is Brian asking for a meeting, Like, what is he trying to get out of this? Because if I wasn't very clear, they would come ready like with why other things weren't going to work or why this would be better. And I just wanted to focus the meeting on, okay, you have way more experience than me. This is the experience I'm looking to get out of you. So here are my questions. And I always appreciate when folks approach me and they approach with actual questions as opposed to like, hey, I just want to learn your backstory. Like, unfortunately, my backstory is already out there. Like, I've done so many podcasts, I'll just give you a link. But if you really want to chat with me, like, tell me your backstory. Like I appreciate that more than me once again sharing my story. Floyd, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same. I was gonna say the exact same thing. As in, like, another thing that helped me, I feel like, was that I came out already having the research done. Like, usually, and I know with tech, it's getting popularized now. Like, it's getting very popular within TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and a lot of people are looking for like that quick fix. They're like, oh, I see you making money. Like, how can I get this? But I came with specific ideas and like specific questions with each person. Like, it was personalized, where I see this person's good at security. Like, how do you think I should get farther in this space? Like, what do you think about this cert? What do you think about this boot camp? What do you think about this lab? Or with somebody with networking, it's the same thing. How do you set up a virtual machine? How do you set up this? And I think they appreciated that, because coming from somebody who has a big following and people probably reach out to you all the time, it's probably a sight for sore eyes when somebody actually comes with something valuable, or like something that actually makes you think. Like, a couple of times people have said to me like, oh, you really don't even need this. You already have a lot of things figured out. But I'm like, I just want to hear your perspective on what I'm already thinking, because I already know that, especially in tech, it's very personal. It's like a track meet. Like, it's a very personalized experience on how far you get, how far you get, because no matter how many certs you get, no matter how many labs, no matter how good your resume is, you still have to perform. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And that's I mean, when it comes down to tech, like, you can read all the getting started guys and get all that information. But like, if you're gonna be asking for mentorship and asking for like the secrets, like how things are actually work on the job, like those are the questions I'd respect you even more if you ask those questions as opposed to like, what's a good language to learn? Like, I don't know. Tell me. I honestly don't have any context of what language you need to learn today in 2022, because I learned 10
You
years
know who
ago.
knows though? Google. Google knows that.
Google this. Yes, let me Google that for you. Travell, you got your hand up.
You just made me think of something, B Dougie. When I was a junior engineer, like for the first 3 months, my bills kept failing. My PR sucked. It was just crazy as hell, like the worst time of my life. And one of the things that I did, I really, really needed a mentor, and I didn't need like that kind of soft mentor who was gonna come in and like bullshit with me and talk about all this organic stuff. I needed someone who was gonna be like, "Yo, you're a shitty programmer, and this is what you need to do to get better." And one thing that I did was I looked at who was the most responsive person to some of the things that I was submitting. Like, who were the people that were trying to give me criticism or be in conversation with the code that I was putting out? And one of the dopest things happened. Like, my biggest critic became my mentor. I ended up like they were literally on every comment, and I just at first I had this kind of attitude like, why is this motherfucker like writing all this shit and not giving me good advice and all this other stuff. So one day I decided to like reach out directly and be like, hey, do you have like 2 hours that we can just sit and go over some of these things? And it was a transformative experience for me that kind of propelled me into software engineering, then being ready for a senior role and all this other stuff. But one of the things I recommend is when you are in the thick of the shit, and not even in a big company, but in the thick of the shit, and you're just like, everything's failing, I'm sucking, this is a hot mess. The people that are giving you the most criticism have the potential to be your biggest mentors and can jump in and help you. And more than likely, if they're giving you tons of criticism, they're gonna have time to meet with you. So that's one of the things that you made me think of.
I don't know why. Like I feel like the just the PR just like that's like the best way to find somebody to just to level up your to level up your skills. The person who's already willing to tell you you suck and why. You know, to be like just talk to them. They're gonna continue to tell you what you need to improve. Like funny enough, a friend of mine had a story very similar to that where he was a networking engineer. I think he's in security now, but like he would have somebody who would just literally, practically like he was like, "You're not good enough yet. Like you have." You just need to work on this type of stuff. These are the fundamentals that you need. But like he was just very much willing to tell him, this is where you're weak on, and this is what you need to improve. But I also had like another point that I kind of wanted to make as well. It's like I know we're kind of talking from the person who knows more than you, who has more experience than you, who's been in the thick of it longer than like we reach out to those people, but definitely don't, definitely those relationships, Brian was talking about this earlier, but those kind of relationships with the people who are on your level or who are, may not necessarily be on your level. Those relationships, you can learn a lot from those relationships, like you can definitely learn a lot from just like your colleagues. I guess in this case, as you're talking about with the PR, it's your colleague, but like you know don't forget about the people who are also learning along with you. And even if it's not necessarily mentorship where they have information and you're kind of extracting that information, that moral support, like people want to say that coding isn't hard, but there will be days where you're sitting there and you're just like, why am I doing any of this? And being able to just kind of talk to that person and express your frustration, and it could be like, I completely understand where you're coming from, or it could just very well be like, I've been in that situation before, let me help you get out of it, type deal. But just I just kind of wanted to bring up the, like, don't forget the people who are on your level and that are on the journey with you, are not necessarily have gone through the journey way ahead of you, and they're just talking about their experience to try and help you. Like definitely the people on your level is also still good people to talk to. Oh,
Yeah, Void, you got your hand up.
But I think like Travell, you made me think about something that I never really thought about, that I wasn't going to speak about. But coming into it feeling like you know everything, or like exude, because I know, especially for me, since I'm young, I'm 21, I just got into tech, kind of. But when I get to new positions, I had to break down that security mechanism that I had, where I'm showing that, oh, I know this, I know this, I know that, because I came from a sales background, and being young in sales, people would pick on you because, oh, you don't know nothing about this, oh, you don't know nothing about that. But I had to realize that if I'm seeking help, I cannot be the knight in shining armor. Like if I'm seeking help, I need to be someone that is receptive to criticism. That And even if I ask somebody how they'll do it, because oftentimes with me, I like doing things my way. But I had to ask some people that, you know, just got on the job recently, and I was like, why do you do it this way? Because he does things backwards of the way that I do it. And he was just saying, well, I mean, it's easier if you break stuff. It's easier to know how to fix it if you break it before. And I never thought about it. So, it's always that, it's kind of a balance of being someone that's assertive, but not being someone who's cocky. That works both ways.
I agree. So I play dumb the first 90 days of every role, and I received this advice from a mentor. But um, in my engineering roles, in every one of them, I've been like, "Oh shit, how you do that? Oh, Rails server? Okay, cool, bet." And it's not. it's not to be coy and it's not to be like an asshole or anything like that. It's really to figure out because there's a mind map to every situation that you're in, and there's a mind map to every kind of architecture. I don't care what company you work for or anything like that. Like, yeah, everybody could say, oh, we use like microservices that are distributed, and then there's all this other stuff happening. But there's some kind of tribal knowledge behind a lot of things that happen in tech. And so what like you get the best mentors, or you find out who are the people that are generous with their knowledge and time, right? Like, play dumb as hell. Like, I legit had a motherfucker walk me through Ruby on Rails after I had built like 5 apps on it, and it was my senior engineer at the time, and I was like, bet. So you are going to be the best mentor for me in this space. And he ended up being phenomenal. So to your point, Lloyd, I agree. Like, walking in with this, no matter what training or what cert or whatever you have, like, walking in with this mentality of being like, yo, I'm going to play dumb because these motherfuckers built this shit and they know the back door, they know where the skeleton's at, they know the customer problems and all this shit. And I'm going to flip it so they feed me all of those things is the quickest way to skill up. I mean, if you think about it, you kind of don't even need to construct a 30, 60, 90-day plan. Right now, I'm transitioning from like software engineering into a technical product manager role. And that is my entire strategy. Like, I've sent out meeting makers to the engineering team that I'm working with. Me and my designer are sitting down, like, all this stuff. And my intention and plan is just to play dumb and find out like who the motherfuckers in the space is gonna pour the most into me, because those are gonna be my mentors, and they also are gonna champion my roadmap and the process ultimately for me.
And I'd even go one up too as well. It's like being humble enough to not to correct somebody and say I already know Ruby on Rails, but just let them explain the way they explain it. To then walk into like now we're gonna find out where the bodies are buried. So like we're all the sort of unearthed errors and all the sort of yeah, it's one thing like you've been there since the inception of the product. I would have learned every single thing about this product, so that way I can walk away with some knowledge, and people will come to me in the future. And yeah, I've been doing that a lot for sure. I make sure it's whenever I leave a job, I make sure that uh, it hurt. Like, I don't want to hurt the company that I'm leaving, but it hurts when I leave a job because I know so much about the company I'm leaving. And I would say same thing with GitHub. I've only been there 4.5 years. I haven't been there since the beginning, but I learned a lot by reading old commits and asking all the people who have been there for 10 years. Because like very few GitHub employees have been there for 10 years, so you stand out. Ask them all the questions because they'll provide all the answers. They've got tons of stories to share, which I can't wait until that book is written too as well about GitHub.
Book about Git. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, go. I want to hear about this book about GitHub too.
I was going to say the same thing. I was like, there's a book about GitHub. Please elaborate.
Well, I mean, so Chad, we were sitting in a chat. So Chad's working with me on open source. I don't know if that's clear, but we were sitting in our all hands, and I was talking about, oh yeah, this is why this is why our product is better, because this podcast that the founder was on 6 years ago explained why all the infrastructure is broken, and this is why we're not going to build it. We're not going to structure our data the same way that GitHub does it, because this is the sort of ceiling they built for themselves. So now we can now go above the ceiling. So like basically those are the type of conversations I had. But like obviously there's way more stories unrelated to tech about GitHub that will make an amazing book.
I mean, I don't think that it's completely unrelated because, to be honest, I'm actually afraid of taking jobs in companies that are not in my SME domain. So if my entire experience in tech has been in fintech and payments, and so specific like what that has afforded me, and I've done several things, right? Like, I started off doing like training machine learning models at American Express for fraud, and then moving on to like merchant payment processing APIs and stuff like that. And what that has allowed me is a kind of nuance. I actually would be intimidated moving into a company like GitHub because now there's that domain switching going on, which is why I'm like Chad. I'm fascinated about this problem going on in tech where like people are very, very adamant about getting a job and securing the bag. And I get it. I get all of those things and finding the right mentor who's going to propel you. But I do think that like having deep domain expertise serves you in such a way where there's a specific set of problems that this company is trying to solve, whether it be architecturally or how it's trying to go to market or anything like that. And the more domain expertise you're able to have, you're able to supply those things. So I love this GitHub book that's happening.
Well, if I could jump in real quick, Chad, to respond to Travell, your expertise. Let me tell you how valuable your expertise right now is for GitHub. So GitHub started as a product where you paid $5 a month to get access to private repos, and obviously the business model has expanded into so many other avenues and features. And more recently, the feature that kind of changed the game for GitHub was GitHub Actions. It's actually the feature why Microsoft bought us, or bought GitHub. I guess I could probably say that because I own Microsoft stock, so they bought us. So the change in what I was talking about infrastructure is that because you only were charged for your repos, when you think about GitHub Actions, you're billed by minutes. So GitHub had to build all this entire infrastructure on payments in their platform that did not exist on how do you charge per minute for a feature. And payments is a very like internally we have this team. It's called Gitcoin at GitHub, and it was a play on Bitcoin. Obviously, there's a Gitcoin project externally, but these are like the experts on how payments work, and they're the sort of lords of that domain. Very small team, and a lot of that team actually coincidentally went to Coinbase when Coinbase was doing their extra hiring in 2018. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, if you have very specific domain knowledge, there's a good chance that some startup that accelerated growth over the past couple years and then acquired by Microsoft is now actively hiring for people who know specifically, who can like be pointed at a problem and solve it really quickly. And I think even with what we're working on at open source, like we're working with tons of data. Like data science is something that we'll probably end up hiring for in the next 12 months. Because like we could do so many SQL queries ourselves, but at the end of the day, like we don't really know what the answers are. We need to get somebody who's way more of an expert in that spot, in that position. But not hiring for that today, but we will be for sure. Sorry, Chad, you had your hand up before I jumped in.
I mean, to be honest, you kind of said what I was about to say. Like, I think there was a tweet a couple of days ago or a couple of weeks ago, kind of describing, like people, the general kind of advice given to people about kind of leveling up their salary is, every 2 years you find another job, because it's like you're going to make more money when you move jobs. But like the tweet was saying that, that's an okay short term strategy, but definitely if you sit there and you sit at a job for an extended period of time, 3-4 years, and you gain all of that domain knowledge, you just become, like you become a significantly more valuable engineer. One, with the domain knowledge. Two, one of the things that they kind of mentioned was that you're there long enough to see the consequences of decisions that you made, some time ago, and you learn that lesson. But you get just that compounded information makes you so much more valuable that if you end up moving, you just become a more valuable engineer, in the long run. So as I was gonna say that, but you more or less kind of, with examples and everything, you just more or less said the same thing.
I love it. I got that advice actually from there was this book called How Google Works that came out by like Eric Schmidt. And it was a really, really great read. But one of the things he did at the in the appendix of the book, I think he said, you know, if you want a good career, and not specifically in tech, you shouldn't think about roles. You should think about the kind of problems you want to solve. And it's dope as hell. Like I love being able to code. Like it's the dopest shit where I'm able to wake up. Like there are things right now in my house, like devices that I have OAuth tokens for, because they annoy me with their timings and stuff. And I'm building custom shit, so it's a great skill to have. But I think what I did for myself that really helped early on was I defined the kind of problems I just wanted to solve in general. And a lot of those problems were fintech problems or payments problems or fraud or all this other stuff. And so then it became to the topic, it became easier to decipher, okay, whether somebody would be a great short term or like long term mentor. So, for example, there are problems in payments that may not be directly technical related, or I should say fintech, that may not be tech related to the technology, but related to like, oh, do these people have access, or is this user group considered? And if there's a person that I've met, like a UX designer or anybody who's like working in that space that wants to exchange knowledge, I kind of pair up with them because all that's going to do is just increase that domain expertise. So I'm always like, I have like two mentees now, and they're really excited about code, which I'm excited about. But I keep telling them at some point I would like for you to think about you have this amazing ability to spin up apps and to create whatever you want. With that ability, what kind of problems in the world do you want to solve? Because at some point, when you define those problems that you want to solve, you're going to realize that your mentorship relationship with me, you may have to outgrow or rethink or begin to ask different things of me. And I think that's okay. But one of the things I would like to see in like specifically the Black tech space is what kind of problems are you into? Because then that can begin to create a kind of orbit of mentors and people who will invest in you and pour into that.
Now, I was going to say, I was just going to echo that that's a great thought that I think a lot of folks don't really put a lot of thought. At least the folks that approach me about getting their job, like getting their next job. Like when I was mentoring somebody briefly when they're trying to break into tech, they had like years of experience, like from hobbyists writing code. And when I asked them like what were they looking for, they're like, oh, I want to write React full time. And I was like, okay. But if the answer was like, oh, I want to be in. All right, cool. I want to be in. Sorry, my son is talking to me off camera or off mic. But yeah, if you want to be involved in fintech, or if you want to solve problems in like getting people, food on the table, like that is like probably a better place to start with, because now I'm intrigued. Like, who do I know in my network who can work in social impact and there's a coding issue that they can solve? Like, I want to find that now because I'm interested in solving your problem, like solving that problem with you. Not necessarily me writing that code, but I'll find places you can write that code.
So I do have a question, kind of, and to be honest, it's somewhat of a personal question, because to be quite honest, I would say I kind of have the same problem as well. Like, how did you come across the problems that you ended up wanting to solve? I guess this is for the speakers, but how did you come across the problems that kind of made you think like, hey, this is something that I really want to kind of get better at, because it's like, me personally, I have a lot of, I guess, I've touched a lot of languages, but I don't necessarily have that kind of, outside of maybe front-end engineering, I don't have that super domain specific, knowledge. like I have domain specific knowledge for like my other activities, but not necessarily like translating into programming. So this is like a really interesting kind of topic for me. Like, could you elaborate?
So your other activities like Street Fighter.
Nope, not like yes. Funny enough, so I guess I'll give a little bit more context. One of the reasons why I want so I'd love to join Twitch, and one of the reasons why I'd love to join Twitch, and you can say whether or not this is a good idea or not, but like I've been into esports for the last decade, because I play Street Fighter, and it's like that's something that I really enjoy. You know what I mean? But I haven't really explored that in terms of like what value can I deliver in that space? So I don't know. It's just like I said, it's just an interesting question.
Chat, but
For
you
me.
have, because I'm a gamer and I know that if you love Street Fighter that much, there's some shit you are on there with like other nerds and you're just like, we just don't fuck with this. Personally, I don't play a lot of Pokemon, but I love like shadowing like Pokemon discords and everything going on, because when like ginning and all of those things are really specific. They're these amazing problems. Like you gin a Pokemon and then you bring it out to battle, and then all of a sudden the person you're battling is fucking you up, and then it becomes this whole problem of like, okay, how do we get to a point where Nintendo can accept gym Pokemon on the battlefield as regular Pokemon? So I live in a reality that believes that Chad has played Street Fighters and you know that game in and out, and there's something in that game that you're like, yo, this is a big ass problem. And it may not be a problem with presence, right? Like it may not be a game presence problem where it's like, you know, I don't feel like the controls are syncing with the character, or I don't feel like the punches are leading to the accurate amount of HP happening. But there's a specific problem or there's some bullshit you like, yo, they could do better at this. And I
You
think
know,
that's where your problems come from.
Ironically, like you bring that up. So like SF5 probably has the I don't know if it has the best training room anymore. It used to have, like when it came out, it had the best training room, and they kind of put a lot of effort into it. But one of the key things, like especially as a fighting game player, one of the key things you want to know is frame data and hitboxes. And I'll try not to get too technical into this, but like
No,
they
get
solved the
technical. You are mentoring us on this too.
All right, so frame data is generally for every second there are 60 frames in a second, 16.67 milliseconds. Each frame is 16.67 milliseconds. Effectively, like that's your math, right? Not everybody does this. I do this, but not everybody does this. But you kind of have to have a general understanding of frame data to play the game effectively, right? So like one of the more important things you learn this in Street Fighter 4 is punishes, right? So when somebody does an attack, if you have like say for instance a 5 frame, 6 frame punish, that tends to lead to a lot of damage, right? In older fighting games, getting that data was really difficult. Like it would require somebody sitting down, recording all the characters, recording them well, getting it at 60 frames per second, and then counting the frames, and then figuring out like the hitboxes and stuff. It was a very difficult process. During Street Fighter 5, there were a few engineers that spent a lot of time figuring out how to get the fighting game to display hitboxes. And like for me, that was like a massive deal, because it's like now kind of how the hitboxes work, how, like, because effectively, what you see on the screen, you see pretty lights and flashing and so on and so forth. But what really is going on is just a bunch of boxes, like a bunch of squares interacting with each other. And like that's probably more important things that, anyways, like, you know, these, like, hitbox viewer is like a big deal for fighting games, and a lot of times, you know, that's like something that engineers who enjoy these fighting games, that's the first thing they'll come up with, you know. Like, GGPO is probably one of the more interesting kind of engineering stories. Is that GGPO is it's like they call it netcode, how the games kind of interact with each other when they're online. So initially, when fighting games came out, they were more about kind of keeping, so when you're playing fighting games online, you have, you know, two streams. You have the two machines are playing the game, you know, locally, and then you're effectively trying to say you're trying to preserve that state across the network. I don't know if I'm on what you call it, describing this properly, but like, the original idea was to keep the two machines as synced as possible, and that would be difficult because if anything happens, if there's like network issue, or if the machine slows down for whatever reason, one of the machines would have to slow down, right? And GGPO came up with this concept that, okay, the machine just streams its information, you know, without worrying too much about the other machine. But what we will do is we will send the inputs, and then the other machine will get those inputs and will display them, you know, with the like the frame data information. And they call it rollback netcode. I'm not necessarily sure if I'm just explaining it correctly, but like, that's a whole fascinating story. Like, the person's out of San Francisco, and they funny enough. So it's funny because Evo is actually happening in the next couple of days, but they ran one of the biggest fighting game tournaments. They ran one of the biggest fighting game tournaments in the world, and like, they kind of had this talk where they were talking about like how GGPO got as good as it was. And like, one of the things that they did was like, so they released it and people were, you know, using it and so on and so forth, with like emulators and stuff like that. And it ended up going to Brazil, or sorry, Brazilians ended up reaching out because like they were like, oh, this is great, you know, we can actually play with each other, because Brazil apparently had a notoriously poor, might still have a notoriously poor internet, just infrastructure, and it really helped them able to play with each other. And like, a lot of GGPO's current like resiliency and like how strong the netcode is came from the fact that, you know, he would send out new versions of GGPO, and Brazilian players would play, and it's like, oh yeah, this is better, this is better. Oh no, this wasn't a good idea. You know, could you fix this? And it was just like that kind of back and forth really allowed GGPO to become such a strong, I guess, netcode solution. Like, I don't know, that's a whole random tangent.
Okay, so Chad, I want you to think about this. Why shouldn't I hire you to solve that problem? Right? Why shouldn't I, like, regardless of the tech? Because to me, it sounds like ETL pipelines and like Hadoop and Apache have to get involved eventually. But why shouldn't I hire you to solve that problem? And even better, if you're out looking for a mentor or trying to engage with people, right? Why wouldn't I want to connect with you if you are thinking about the same kind of problem that I'm solving? And so I think, to answer you answered your own, bro, like, you just took us down this whole tunnel. And for me in fintech, that's how it's kind of been. It started with my grandmother having to walk 2 miles to cash her social security check. And I was like, why do we have to walk 2 miles to do this bullshit? And then it turned into an entire career. So I think, you know, with mentorship and all these other things, you have to really sit with yourself and be like, yo, what are the things in the world that pisses me off? What is the shit that I just can't walk away from? Um, Going back to the Pokemon community, y'all, they're opinionated as fuck in Discord. So I want you to I want you and other people to think about that, because it's like you have to know the technologies, but then there is some point where the problem surpasses that. The problem, like your passion for the problem, kind of inspires me to the point of saying, "Yo, I don't care what time you need to learn the technology to move that amount of data to make sure the hit points are on point, right?" Like I think that's the kind of depth that also goes into connecting with a mentor, what problems that they're trying to solve. And if you set up a 15-30 minute coffee chat with somebody and they seem to be working in this domain that you're super interested in, and you get on that call and you're like, yo, it's dope that you've done all this senior engineer manager shit, but I want to talk to you about what's going on with the hit points. I guarantee you it's gonna be like it's gonna be a dope connection that emerges from that.
Yeah, I got one additional thing to say too as well, because like I was enjoying that journey about these hit points, because I'm thinking about how to apply that and like latency and bandwidth and throughput. My interview, one of my interview questions interview rounds at GitHub was actually I had to present a topic to a few engineers, and one of them was a maintainer of Homebrew, the other one wrote a book about open source, and at the time I wasn't really intimidated. I realized who they were after the fact, but I gave I shared a conversation of a problem I had personally in the Bay Area, which is baseball, and I don't like baseball, but there's two baseball teams here between Oakland and San Francisco. So if you ride the train to get to work, you have to avoid literally this Saturday, Oakland and San Francisco play each other. So that means if you want to use public transportation, don't do it. Like don't put yourself to that, because you just won't be able to, like, it's just going to be a hot mess. You got to stand with the mask on. Just don't do it. So the week I moved to the Bay Area, I got an apartment. I went to Target and I picked up an air mattress and like a sort of comforter set and pillow. So mind you, like it's a lot of stuff to be carrying on the train, as well as like my backpack with the laptop in it. And I got on the train, and that was the day the Bay Series had let out from San Francisco. So I get on the train because I had to go to the Target. So I'm like, it's like already like 8:30 at this point because I worked late because food at the office. Anyway, long story short, get on the train, figure out there's baseball that happens in the Bay Area, which I was not familiar with. I wrote an app to basically say, text me whenever there's a baseball game in San Francisco. Because if there's a baseball game, I'm going to plan accordingly. But I don't care about baseball enough to go Google, is there baseball today? So it was just basically isttherebaseballtoday.com or something. I don't remember what it was. It's not up anymore. And then I solved that problem. And I quickly solved the problem by just hitting a webhook that someone scraped ESPN.com. So there's an open API on it. Solved it once. And then next year, to my surprise, there was baseball again. So I had to figure out when there was baseball in San Francisco again. So I rewrote the thing. I wrote it with the front-end JavaScript library, which was Ember. So I rebuilt this whole thing and was able to solve the problem. Now I know when there's baseball. And then the year after, baseball showed up again. And it turns out like there's like 100 and something games. So I rewrote the thing. And at this time, like this new service called Lambda came out, which was like AWS had this way to, so you didn't have to pay for servers. It was like serverless functions. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I don't have to pay for servers. I can run this app every year and not pay $7 a month to Heroku. So I learned how to do serverless functions because I didn't want to go to work when there was baseball. And then eventually I got into like how to send notifications, how to build a mobile app, how to rewrite this entire thing in Rust and Go. And I would just do this every single year because I had a problem with baseball and not wanting to like show up when there's baseball. So like not as intense as like hit points for StreetFighter with you, Chad, but I think there's always going to be a problem to be solved. And as long as you're solving, like if you have questions about this, and that interview, what I was getting at for GitHub, like that was a very interesting conversation. It was very on point because everybody knows that GitHub's office, that works at GitHub, is 1 block away from the baseball stadium. So like it's an actual app that actually would be really useful for all GitHub employees. So like I kind of scratched a nerve, and we had a whole conversation around baseball, and and I learned the history of baseball, and I started giving talks on baseball, just because I learned serverless functions to tell me when to not go to the city.
Yeah, I need to do the same. Like I have I have like so they made GGPO. I guess going back to Street Fighter, they made GGPO open.
Could you explain what GGPO is? Because you didn't explain the acronym.
Oh, so the acronym GGPO is Good Game Peace Out. Or Good
Okay.
Games Peace Out. I don't know why, but that's kind of like so. You play a game. You win, you lose. You send GGs. That's it. I don't know if the peace out thing was because this was written in like 2004 and I think it was 2004. When is it? I know it was early 2000s, but yeah, that's the name of it. It's GGPO. Like it's funny because you think that it's something like super technical. Nope, it's Good Games Peace Out.
Yeah, that's like the LGTM, the Let's Get This Money.
Oh, I still love that story. That's hilarious.
Yeah, we'll get to that story later. But yeah, keep going with the. Sorry to interrupt with the GGPO.
Oh, no, yeah. What specific questions did you have?
Oh, I don't even know what we were just talking about. You started going down. You started talking about GGPO and how they open sourced it, and then I asked you
Oh,
what GGPO.
yeah. So so before it was closed source, they would sell licenses to game companies. And they recently open sourced it. And I'm not 100% sure because a lot of companies don't necessarily say, "Oh, we're using GGPO." They always say that we're using Rollback Netcode, but it's all a lot more people are kind of using it. And so I'm assuming that because it got open sourced, there's just people are just more open to using it because before again you had to pay licensing, like I don't necessarily know how like customer service worked or anything like that. So like or I guess developer experience and stuff like that. But it's good to see like it's an important kind of I think it's probably one of the most important pieces of kind of tech for the fighting game community specifically because it's like with the older technologies like if I was in Florida and you were in Atlanta, you know it's very likely that we couldn't really play. Like I've had that experience. It's not great, you know and like with like rollback netcode the way it is now like or with rollback netcode like people have had matches from like California to Africa. I remember there was a match like that. Like, what was it? I mean, like Guilty Gear uses rollback netcode, and like you could easily play across the pond. New York to London, and it's like a reasonable match. Like you can actually play that. Like you couldn't play like New York to Chicago. Like that was potentially a difficult match. And it's like there's a game right now that everybody plays, like StreetFighter 5. They don't have the best implementation of rollback netcode, but like I can't play. I mean, granted, I'm in Jamaica, but I can't play a match with somebody in Florida, and I've tried. It's like that's one of the reasons why we kind of stopped playing because we can't play that. But like with rollback netcode, GGPOs came up with the idea of rollback netcode, but or for fighting games specifically, because I think we had rollback netcode for shooters. But anyways, yeah, I don't know. It's just an important technology. Like it's probably one of the, especially as the communities have become a lot more kind of global. Like it's not necessarily before, like in the 90s and like the early 2000s, it's very very regional. It's very much about like, oh, maybe West Coast plays East Coast, and those were the people who were kind of beefing, you know what I mean? But now it's much more like, America versus Europe versus Japan versus, like I guess Oceania. I think that's what it's called officially, but like, versus, like Europe, different parts of Europe. It I don't know. It's very interesting. I have to say it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, coming away from this conversation, I now really understand how deep you are in this gaming world. But just having this conversation, like, there's so many ways you could apply this problem to even web programming or mobile programming, because I think that's a like someone who's just interested in the problem. It's like a lot of times you talk about are you passionate or whatever. Like you just have to be invested. Like is this a problem that you're invested in? Like with my baseball story or your Street Fighter story, just by the sheer being able to not be able to play the game like competitively in Jamaica, it's enough to someone to be like, oh, I'm gonna solve this problem. And I think of Theo. I know Theo. He's working on Ping. Like Theo is solving really the problem of the fact that you're right now. Like not a lot of people don't know that we actually have a video recording at the moment. If you go to open source on YouTube, youtube.com/open source, scroll to the bottom, you'll see our previous video about Fang ruining open source. This video will show up on the YouTube page as well. And like your video is lossless. Like I feel like my video, because I'm doing all this recording on the end, like you're getting a degraded version of my video. It'll be good when it's recorded, but like your video is better than mine, and you're coming in from Jamaica through Ping at the moment, and that's because Theo wanted to solve a problem that was this complaint for so many Twitch users to be able to have guests on air on screen, and yeah, now it's a solved problem.
Yeah. Like, yeah, it's funny. I've never really kind of made. I've been playing fighting games for what? Well, to be fair, I've been playing fighting games for a long time, but I've been playing fighting games like actually going to events and taking them seriously for maybe 13 years. When did Street Fighter 5 4 come out? Let's call it 12 years. But yeah, I've been doing that for a long time, and there's like a lot of like little. I'm trying my best because there's a lot of stuff I could talk about, but and this is not a Street
Yeah.
Fighter.
Yeah, this isn't a Street Fighter space, but it came up because about finding problems that you want to see solved. Like rather than search for mentors in the state of like I need a mentor to teach me React or I need a mentor to teach me Netcode. Rather than focus on that, focus on like what problems do you want to get mentorship in to help solve. And that's one thing that I've been doing is I actually just got off a hour-long call with another founder, and this founder actually they're working on an entirely different problem that I'm working on, but the problem that they solved is how to get free money and how to get grants. They funded an entire company without giving away any equity by just getting grants, and they gave me a list of like 20 things to like newsletters and applications to fill out. And they're like, yeah, do all this stuff. Like you're one of these will say yes, and it'll be good for like you'll give you runway for like another 6 months without giving up equity. I'm like, oh wow, okay. Like you just unveiled an entire world that I had no idea existed. Like I get there's grants that exist. I get there's a lot of them are really focused on women, minority founders, and stuff like that. A lot of them want you to have like revenue. Like Morgan Stanley wants you to have revenue and a product that they can take, equity from. But and she's like, this is a female founder as well, and they basically just said like, here is a list. Like, let me give you all the mentorship that you can basically sustain the thing you're working on. I'm like, oh wow, okay. I need to talk to more founders, and that's currently if you're a founder, DM me. I would love to learn knowledge. I could share knowledge to you. It could be a mutual experience, mutual fun. Yeah. So anyway, we're actually running pretty long. I didn't actually expect to go this long in this conversation. I think that's why we're talking about Street Fighter at this point, Chad. I do appreciate everyone who's come up, Travell and Void as well as everyone who's been commenting. Swix came in, said hello. Vortex actually said hello to Swix. So if anybody doesn't know that, in the bottom right of your screen, you can actually reply to the original tweet and say hello or ask a question there. I know we didn't really take much questions, and I never really took a breath to say everyone jump up and ask questions or share stories. People just did it, so I appreciate that. Obviously, if you want to request to speak, just go ahead and do that, but not now because we're actually ending now. So with that said, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I did mention a couple times we'll have this space will be up online for 30 days on Twitter, but we also have a YouTube channel which we've been recording the video of this. It's basically our sort of secret sauce backstage podcast. We can't say secret sauce because I already have a secret sauce podcast. So I think what was the name we The pizza party, yes. So this is our pizza party where we talk about engineering concepts, and as long as 2 pizza teams show up, so at least folks that enough people that can eat 2 pizzas, I think it's going to be a great conversation. And I think it's got the tagline there. I'm just sort of spitballing this at this point. But yeah, Chad, as always, thanks so much for joining us and chatting with me. I feel like I learned so much more about you in these conversations as well. So when we launch this product, I know what I'll need to get you. If you don't have any sort of, you probably already have all the Street Fighter paraphernalia and stuff like that. So do you have the joystick and the gamepad as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm trying my best not to have a whole conversation about why you should own one, but
Okay, you got to start a blog or something.
I probably
we need more
should.
Street Fighter content on your Twitter.
I should stream because I'm not that bad. Like I should stream playing. I don't know why I don't stream. I probably should stream playing fighting games. I don't know why.
Challenge accepted. All right. With that, cheers, y'all.